Lisa Harper stood at the massive gates of the Galactic Military Academy on Centauri Prime and felt her heart racing inside her chest. The building in front of her was enormous and made of some kind of blue metal that seemed to glow in the alien sunlight. Giant spires reached up toward the purple sky and alien symbols covered every surface. She had dreamed of this moment for 10 years, but now that she was here she felt very small and very human. The security guard at the entrance was a Centauri warrior who stood almost 9 feet tall. His skin looked like natural armor plating and his forearms each ended in claws that could probably cut through steel. When he looked down at Lisa, his yellow eyes showed nothing but disgust. He took her credentials with one massive hand and studied them for a long time. "Human instructor," he said in a voice that sounded like grinding rocks. "You are the one they are forcing us to accept." It was not a question, and his tone made it clear what he thought about the whole situation. Lisa nodded and tried to keep her voice steady. "Yes, sir. I am here to teach basic combat theory." The guard made a sound that might have been laughter, but it was not a pleasant sound. "Basic combat theory. Of course they give the human the most worthless class." He handed back her credentials and pressed a button on his console. "Enter. Try not to embarrass your entire species on your first day." Lisa walked through the gates and into the academy grounds. Everything around her was built for beings much larger than humans. The doorways were 12 feet high and the corridors were wide enough for 3 Centauri to walk side by side. Other cadets moved through the halls and most of them stopped to stare at her. She heard whispered comments in various alien languages, but she did not need a translator to understand the tone. Her first stop was the administration office, where she would meet High Commander Vextar. The Centauri who served as Academy Director had a reputation throughout the galaxy as one of the finest military minds of his generation. Lisa had studied his tactical victories during her time at Earth's Naval Academy, and she respected his strategic brilliance, even if she disagreed with some of his methods. The commander's office was larger than most human apartments. Vextar sat behind a desk that looked like it was carved from a single piece of black stone and covered with holographic displays showing fleet movements and tactical scenarios. When Lisa entered, he did not look up from his work for several minutes. This was clearly meant to show her how unimportant he considered her presence. "Commander Harper," he finally said without raising his head, "I want you to understand something very clearly. Your appointment to this academy is not based on merit or ability. It exists only because the Galactic Coalition has decided that we must show diversity in our faculty. You are here as a symbol and nothing more." Lisa felt anger rising in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. "Sir, I graduated first in my class from Earth Naval Academy, and I have served with distinction in 3 border conflicts. I believe my record speaks for itself." Now Vextar did look up and his eyes were cold and calculating. "Your record shows that you are competent by human standards, but this academy trains the finest warriors in the galaxy. Our students will command fleets and lead armies against enemies that would terrify your entire species. They need instructors who understand real warfare, not the small conflicts that humans call battles." He stood up, and his full height was even more impressive than Lisa had expected. "You have been assigned to teach basic combat theory because it is a class that cannot cause serious damage even if taught poorly. Your students will be the weakest cadets in the academy, those who have already failed more important courses. Do not mistake this assignment for respect or confidence in your abilities." Lisa straightened her shoulders and met his gaze. "I understand, sir. I will do my best to serve the academy and help my students learn. See that you do. And Commander Harper, remember that you represent not just yourself but your entire species here. The galaxy is watching to see if humans truly belong among civilized races, or if you are simply clever animals who learn to use tools. Do not give them reason to believe the latter." After leaving the commander's office, Lisa found her way to her assigned quarters. The room was smaller than those given to other instructors and located in a section of the building that seemed designed for support staff rather than faculty. The furniture was standard academy issue, but it had clearly been modified for human proportions. Someone had cut down the legs of the desk and chair, but they had done the work roughly and without care. Lisa unpacked her few belongings and tried to make the space feel more like home. She placed a photo of her family on the desk and hung her Earth Naval Academy diploma on the wall. The diploma looked small and insignificant in the large room, but it reminded her of everything she had worked for to get here. That evening, she went to the faculty dining hall for dinner. The room was filled with instructors from a dozen different species, all of them larger and more imposing than any human. Conversation stopped when she entered and she felt dozens of eyes following her as she made her way to the food stations. The meal selection was designed for alien digestive systems, and most of it was inedible for humans. Lisa found some items that looked safe and took them to an empty table in the corner. She ate alone while listening to conversations in languages she could not understand, but the hostile glances sent her way needed no translation. After dinner, she walked through the academy grounds to familiarize herself with the layout. The training facilities were impressive beyond anything she had seen on Earth. Combat simulators that could create entire battlefields, weapon ranges that extended for miles, and starship mock-ups that were perfect replicas of real Coalition vessels. As she explored, she came across a group of cadets practicing hand-to-hand combat in one of the training yards. The students were all from different species, but they shared the same confidence and physical power that seemed to define everyone at the academy. They moved with deadly grace, and their practice weapons struck with enough force to shatter human bones. One of the cadets noticed her watching and said something to his companions. They all turned to look at her, and their expressions ranged from amusement to outright hostility. The original cadet walked over to where she stood. "You must be the human instructor we heard about," he said. His species had blue skin and silver eyes, but his voice carried the same arrogance she had heard from Vextar. "I am Cadet Thakval, first in my combat class. Perhaps you would like to show us some human fighting techniques?" Lisa knew this was a trap, but she also knew that backing down would only confirm their opinion of human weakness. "I appreciate the offer, Cadet, but I think it would be inappropriate for an instructor to spar with students." Thakval smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Of course. Humans always find excuses to avoid real tests of strength. I suppose we should not have expected anything different." Lisa returned to her quarters that night knowing that tomorrow would bring her first real test. She had fought hard to get here, and she would not let prejudice and hostility drive her away. But as she looked out her window at the alien stars above Centauri Prime, she wondered if she truly belonged in this place, or if she was just fooling herself about what humans could accomplish among the stars. Lisa's first class was a disaster from the very beginning. She walked into the basic combat theory classroom and found 23 cadets waiting for her. But their body language told her everything she needed to know about what they thought of having a human instructor. Most of them were sprawled in their chairs with expressions of boredom or barely concealed contempt. A few were openly talking to each other and ignoring her presence completely. The classroom itself was another reminder of how little the academy thought of this course. The holographic projectors were old models that flickered occasionally, and the tactical display board had a crack running down one side. This was clearly where they put students who had failed more important classes and instructors who did not matter. "Good morning, cadets," Lisa said as she moved to the front of the room. "I am Commander Harper, and I will be teaching basic combat theory this semester." A Centauri cadet in the front row raised one of his 4 hands. "Commander, is it true that humans have never won a major military engagement without coalition support?" Lisa felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her voice level. "That is not accurate, Cadet. Earth has a long history of military conflicts and strategic innovations that predate our contact with the coalition. But surely nothing that would be relevant to real galactic warfare," said another student. This one from the Krillian species with their distinctive purple skin and elongated skulls. "I mean, humans fight with primitive weapons against other humans. That hardly compares to commanding star fleets against hostile alien empires." Several other cadets laughed, and Lisa realized that this was a coordinated effort to undermine her authority. They had planned this harassment before she even entered the room. She decided to push forward with her prepared lesson and see if she could win them over with actual content. "Today, we will discuss basic tactical formations and how to adapt them for different battlefield conditions," she began, activating the holographic display. The key principle is flexibility and the ability to respond to changing circumstances. But even as she spoke, she could see that most of the students had stopped listening. The Centauri cadets were particularly dismissive, whispering among themselves in their own language. When she tried to demonstrate a flanking maneuver using the tactical display, one of them stood up. "Commander, with respect, this formation would never work in real combat," the Centauri said. "It relies on stealth and misdirection, rather than strength and honor. A true warrior meets his enemies face to face. Sometimes the most effective approach is not the most direct one, Lisa replied. There are situations where misdirection can achieve victory with minimal casualties. Minimal casualties? The Zentari's voice rose with indignation. Combat is about proving your strength and the strength of your cause. Hiding and sneaking around is what cowards do when they are too weak to fight properly. The other students murmured agreement, and Lisa felt control of the classroom slipping away from her. She tried to continue with the lesson, but it was clear that none of them were interested in learning anything from a human instructor. By the time the class period ended, she felt exhausted and defeated. The next few classes went no better. Her students seemed determined to prove that human military thinking was worthless compared to the established doctrines taught by their alien instructors. They questioned everything she said and dismissed her examples as irrelevant to real warfare. Some of them stopped attending class altogether, and those who did show up made it clear they were only there because attendance was mandatory. Lisa began to dread walking into the classroom each day. She had prepared extensively for this position, studying Galactic Coalition military doctrine and adapting her teaching methods for alien students. But nothing had prepared her for the level of hostility and disrespect she encountered. She started to wonder if High Commander Vextar had been right about her being here only as a symbol. 3 weeks into the semester, everything changed when Lisa was walking through the academy corridors late one evening and heard voices coming from a detention hall. Curiosity made her stop and look inside, where she found 5 students sitting at desks and writing what appeared to be punishment essays. These were clearly cadets who had gotten into trouble and were serving some kind of disciplinary sentence. What caught her attention was that 3 of the 5 students were human. Jake Morrison was a first-year cadet who had come to the academy as part of the exchange program between Earth and the Coalition. Amy Chen was in her 2nd year, but had been held back after failing several combat courses. Steve Martinez was known throughout the academy for questioning orders and challenging established procedures. The other 2 students were aliens, but they looked just as miserable as the humans. Kate Williams was actually half human and half Altarian, which made her an outcast among both species. Ryan Foster was human but had been raised on a frontier colony, where he learned to think differently about everything. Lisa decided to step inside and see what these students were being punished for. "Good evening," she said as she entered the room. "I hope I am not interrupting anything important." Jake Morrison looked up first and his face showed surprise at seeing her. "Commander Harper? What are you doing here?" "I was walking by and noticed the lights were on." "What are you all working on?" Amy Chen held up her paper with a frustrated expression. "We have to write a 1,000-word essay on why following orders without question is essential to military discipline. It's punishment for asking too many questions during combat simulation class." Lisa felt a spark of interest. "What kind of questions were you asking?" Steve Martinez answered before Amy could speak. "We wanted to know why the simulation always assumed we had superior numbers and firepower. What happens when you're outnumbered and outgunned? The instructor said those situations don't matter because coalition forces are always stronger than their enemies." "But that's not realistic," Ryan Foster added. "My colony was attacked by raiders 3 times and we never had superior numbers. We had to use strategy and deception to survive." Kate Williams nodded in agreement. "I asked why we always have to attack from the front. On my mother's world, warriors use the terrain and the environment to gain advantages. But the instructor said that was dishonorable." Lisa looked at these 5 students and realized something important. They were not failures or troublemakers. They were thinking critically about military doctrine and asking the kinds of questions that had made human forces effective despite being physically weaker than most alien species. The Academy was punishing them for the very qualities that could make them exceptional officers. "Would you be interested in discussing some alternative approaches to combat theory?" she asked. "I have some time this evening and it sounds like you have questions that deserve better answers than you've been getting." The 5 students looked at each other with excitement and hope. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, Lisa felt like she might actually be able to teach something valuable. These students were ready to learn because they had already realized that the standard answers were not complete. She pulled up a chair and sat down with them. "Let me tell you about a battle that took place on Earth many centuries ago, when a small force defeated a much larger army by using strategy instead of strength." As she began to speak, Lisa noticed that all 5 students were listening with complete attention. They asked intelligent questions and made connections between her examples and their own experiences. For the next 2 hours, she shared stories and concepts from human military history that were never taught in Galactic Coalition academies. When the session finally ended, Jake Morrison spoke for all of them. "Commander, could we meet like this again? We want to learn more about these different ways of thinking about warfare." Lisa smiled for the first time since arriving at the academy. "I think that could be arranged." Lisa's after-hours meetings with the 5 students became the highlight of her time at the academy. They met 3 times a week in various locations around the academy grounds, always careful to avoid detection by the regular faculty. Lisa found herself looking forward to these sessions more than anything else in her daily routine because these students were eager to learn and challenged everything she taught them in productive ways. Jake Morrison proved to be exceptionally quick at understanding unconventional tactics. During their 3rd meeting, Lisa taught them about guerrilla warfare from Earth's history, and Jake immediately saw how the same principles could apply to space combat. "Instead of trying to match enemy firepower, you use hit-and-run attacks against supply lines and communication networks," he said with excitement in his voice. "You make them waste resources chasing shadows while you strike where they least expect it." Amy Chen had an incredible talent for reading people and understanding their psychological weaknesses. When Lisa described how human armies had used propaganda and misinformation to demoralize enemy forces, Amy began developing profiles of different alien species and how their cultural values could be turned against them. "The Zentari value honor above everything else," she explained to the group. "If you could make them believe their leaders were acting dishonorably, their entire command structure might collapse." Steve Martinez questioned everything, but his questions led to better understanding rather than simple criticism. He challenged Lisa's examples and forced her to explain not just what human forces had done, but why those tactics had worked in specific situations. "You're saying that humans won battles by making enemies fight on human terms instead of their own terms," he said during one late-night session. "But how do you force a stronger enemy to change their strategy?" Kate Williams brought a unique perspective because of her mixed heritage. She understood both human creativity and alien military thinking, which made her excellent at finding ways to combine the best of both approaches. "We don't have to abandon alien tactics completely," she pointed out. "We can use their own expectations against them by appearing to follow standard doctrine while actually doing something completely different." Ryan Foster was the most creative of the group and often came up with ideas that surprised even Lisa. He had grown up on a frontier colony where resources were limited and thinking outside the box was essential for survival. "What if we used the Academy's own training systems against them?" he suggested one evening. "We could create scenarios that look normal but actually teach these new concepts to other students." Word of their meetings began to spread through the Academy in ways that Lisa had not expected. Other students started approaching the 5 humans with questions about the new ideas they were discussing. Carrie Johnson, a human cadet from Lisa's regular classes, asked if she could join their sessions after hearing Jake describe psychological warfare techniques. Tony Garcia, who had been struggling with standard tactical courses, begged Steve Martinez to teach him about adaptive strategy. Soon their group had grown to include 12 students from various species, all of them eager to learn about human military philosophy. Lisa realized she was no longer just teaching 5 individuals, but leading an underground movement that was spreading throughout the academy. The students were sharing knowledge among themselves and developing new applications for the concepts she had introduced. Nicole Adams joined after Amy. Chen taught her how to analyze enemy behavior patterns during combat simulations. Danny Clark became involved when Ryan Foster showed him how to create supply chain strategies that used misdirection to hide true military capabilities. Each new student brought their own perspectives and ideas, making the group stronger and more creative. The meetings became more sophisticated as the group developed confidence in their new approaches. They practiced stealth techniques in the Academy's ventilation systems, learned to communicate through coded messages that looked like normal cadet correspondence, and developed psychological profiles of their instructors to understand how traditional military thinking could be manipulated. Lisa found herself learning as much from the students as she was teaching them. Their questions forced her to think more deeply about human military philosophy and why it was different from the doctrines taught throughout the galaxy. Humans learned to fight wars where they were usually outnumbered and outgunned, she explained during one session. Every other species in the galaxy became dominant through superior strength or technology. Humans had to become dominant through superior thinking. The students began applying their new knowledge in their regular classes, though they had to be careful not to make their changes too obvious. Jake Morrison started performing better in space combat simulations by using unconventional approach vectors that confused the computer systems. Amy Chen improved her scores in tactical analysis courses by predicting enemy behavior instead of just following standard response patterns. Steve Martinez learned to phrase his questions in ways that seemed respectful while actually challenging the fundamental assumptions behind traditional doctrine. Kate Williams developed techniques for making alien instructors think she was following their teachings while actually practicing human-style tactics. Ryan Foster created training exercises that appeared normal but secretly taught other students to think more flexibly about combat situations, but their success was also drawing unwanted attention from the Academy administration. Several instructors complained that their students were asking strange questions and showing less respect for established procedures. High Commander Vextar began receiving reports about unusual behavior patterns among certain cadets, particularly those who had been performing poorly before but were now showing improvement in unexpected areas. The Academy's security systems started monitoring student communications more closely, and Lisa noticed increased patrols in areas where they had been meeting. During one late-night session in an unused training facility, they heard footsteps in the corridor outside and had to hide behind equipment containers until the security patrol passed by. "They're watching us," Amy Chen whispered after the danger had passed. Some of the other instructors are asking questions about students who spend time together outside of regular class periods. Lisa knew they were walking a dangerous line between education and revolution. What had started as informal tutoring sessions had become something much larger and more threatening to the established order at the Academy. If they were discovered, the consequences would be severe not just for her, but for all the students who had trusted her with their careers and their futures. "We need to be more careful," she told the group. "But we also can't stop now. You're all learning things that could change how the galaxy thinks about warfare, but only if you survive long enough to put these ideas into practice." Jake Morrison spoke for the entire group when he said, "We're willing to take the risk, Commander. What we're learning here is too important to give up just because we might get in trouble." Lisa looked around at the faces of these young people who had become more than students to her. They were partners in something that could reshape military thinking throughout the galaxy, but they were also putting their entire futures at risk by following her lead. The weight of that responsibility was both terrifying and inspiring, as she realized how far they had all come from that first night in the detention hall. The emergency alarm that woke the entire Academy at dawn was unlike anything Lisa had ever heard before. The sound cut through the morning air like a blade and continued for several minutes before finally stopping. Within moments, announcement speakers throughout the Academy began, broadcasting urgent messages in multiple languages. "All faculty and senior cadets report to the main briefing hall immediately," the voice repeated over and over. "This is not a drill. All faculty and senior cadets report to the main briefing hall immediately." Lisa dressed quickly and made her way through corridors filled with confused and worried students. The atmosphere in the Academy had changed completely from the usual routine of classes and training exercises. Security personnel were running through the halls, and emergency communication systems were active everywhere she looked. The main briefing hall was packed with Academy staff and the most senior cadets from each class. High Commander Vextar stood at the front of the room with several other high-ranking officers that Lisa had never seen before. Their expressions were grim, and the tension in the room was thick enough to feel. 6 hours ago, the hegemony of Krath launched a surprise attack on Outpost Station Meridian, Vextar announced without any preliminary remarks. "The station is under siege and will fall within days unless relief forces arrive. The nearest coalition battle group is 3 weeks away from the station." A murmur of shock ran through the assembled crowd. Meridian was one of the coalition's most important supply depots, and losing it would severely damage their ability to defend the Outer Rim territories. But more importantly, everyone in the room understood what Vextar was about to say next. "Academy Command has authorized the deployment of final-year cadets to reinforce Meridian and buy time for the main fleet to arrive, he continued. This is an unprecedented decision, but the situation leaves us no alternative. We will be sending our best and most experienced students into actual combat. Lisa felt her stomach drop as she realized what this meant. These cadets had trained for years, but they had never faced real combat against experienced enemy forces. The Krath were known throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors who showed no mercy to their enemies. Sending Academy students against them seemed like sending lambs to slaughter. Vextar began reading names from a list of cadets who would be deployed. Most of them were Zentari or other physically powerful species who had excelled in traditional combat courses. These were the Academy's star students, the ones who were expected to become fleet commanders and military leaders throughout the galaxy. But then something unexpected happened. Vextar paused in his reading and consulted with another officer before continuing. Due to a scheduling error in the deployment roster, additional cadets have been assigned to this mission, he said with obvious displeasure in his voice. The following names have been added to the deployment list. Lisa's heart nearly stopped when she heard Jake Morrison's name called out, followed by Amy Chen, Steve Martinez, Kate Williams, and Ryan Foster. Her secret students were being sent into combat along with the Academy's best and brightest. But unlike the traditional cadets, her students would be going into battle with knowledge and training that no one else at the Academy possessed. The deployment force would travel aboard the light cruiser UCS, Defiant, under the command of Captain Rex Morrison, who happened to be Jake's father. Lisa knew Rex by reputation as a skilled officer who had commanded border patrol missions for over 20 years. But even his experience would be tested by what they were about to face. During the 3 days it took to prepare for departure, Lisa found ways to meet privately with each of her students. She could not give them direct orders or advice without revealing their secret training, but she could remind them of the principles they had learned during their underground sessions. Remember that strength comes in many forms, she told Jake when they met briefly in the Academy library. Sometimes the most effective approach is not the most obvious one. Amy Chen understood immediately when Lisa mentioned the importance of understanding enemy psychology. Different species have different weaknesses, Lisa said carefully. A good officer learns to recognize patterns in enemy behavior. She reminded Steve Martinez about the value of questioning assumptions and thinking flexibly about tactical problems. Kate Williams received guidance about using unexpected combinations of different strategic approaches. Ryan Foster was encouraged to trust his creative instincts even when they contradicted standard doctrine. The day of departure arrived with military ceremonies and speeches about honor and duty. High Commander Vextar personally addressed the departing cadets and reminded them that they represented the finest military tradition in the galaxy. But Lisa noticed that he spent most of his time talking to the traditional cadets and barely acknowledged the presence of her human students. As the cadets boarded transport shuttles to take them to the Defiant, Lisa felt a mixture of pride and terror. These young people had learned to think differently about warfare and combat, but they were about to face their first real test, against an enemy that would show them no mercy if they failed. Jake Morrison caught her eye as he walked toward his transport and gave her a small nod that told her he understood everything she had tried to teach him. Amy Chen paused to look back at the Academy one last time before boarding her shuttle. Steve Martinez, Kate Williams, and Ryan Foster moved with the confidence of students who knew they possessed knowledge that could make the difference between victory and defeat. The Defiant departed Centauri Prime, with 200 cadets and a skeleton crew aboard. As Lisa watched the ship disappear into hyperspace, she realized that everything she had worked for during her time at the Academy was now in the hands of students who had learned to see warfare through human eyes. In the days that followed, news from Meridian was limited and discouraging. The Krath had surrounded the station with overwhelming force and were slowly tightening their siege. Coalition analysts predicted that the station would fall within a week, long before the main relief fleet could arrive. Lisa found herself unable to concentrate on her regular duties as she worried about her students. She had taught them to think creatively and adapt to changing circumstances, but she had never imagined they would be tested in actual combat so soon. The waiting was almost unbearable, as she wondered whether her unconventional teaching methods would prove helpful or harmful when facing real enemies who fought to kill. The Academy continued its normal routine, but everyone knew that something historic was happening at Meridian. For the first time in centuries, Academy cadets were fighting in a real battle against experienced military forces. The outcome would determine not just the fate of an important outpost, but also the future of military education throughout the galaxy. 3 days after the Defiant's departure, all communication from Meridian suddenly stopped. The Academy's long-range sensors could detect energy signatures consistent with massive space battles, but no detailed information was available about what was actually happening in the combat zone. Lisa could only wait and hope that her students were alive and putting their unconventional training to good use against an enemy that had never faced human-style tactics before. The first message from Meridian arrived at the Academy 4 days after communication had been lost, and it was not what anyone expected. High Commander Vexitar stood before the assembled faculty with a expression of complete bewilderment as he read the report that had just arrived from the battle zone. The Krath siege force has withdrawn from Meridian Station, he announced to the shocked silence of the room. The enemy fleet is in full retreat, and coalition forces are pursuing them back toward Krath territory. The station is secure and operational. Lisa felt her heart racing as she waited for more details. The relief that her students were alive was overwhelming, but she could see from Vextar's face that there was more to this story than a simple military victory. The preliminary report indicates that the cadet force aboard the Defiant played a significant role in the battle. Vextar continued with obvious reluctance. However, the tactical methods used appear to have deviated substantially from standard coalition doctrine. Over the following days, more detailed reports arrived from Meridian, and the story they told seemed almost impossible to believe. The Krath had surrounded the station with over 10,000 warriors aboard hundreds of ships, confident that they could capture or destroy the outpost long before any meaningful relief force could arrive. When the Defiant appeared with its small force of cadets, the Krath commanders had dismissed them as insignificant. But something had gone wrong with the Krath battle plan almost immediately. Their ships had begun receiving contradictory orders that split their forces and sent them chasing phantom targets throughout the asteroid field around Meridian. Communications between Krath units had broken down completely, leading to several incidents where they had fired on their own vessels. The reports described Krath forces retreating from battles they were winning, abandoning strategic positions for no apparent reason, and finally withdrawing from the entire system in complete disarray. Coalition analysts were struggling to understand how such a disciplined military force had collapsed so quickly and thoroughly. When the Defiant returned to Zentari Prime 2 weeks later, Lisa was among the crowds that gathered to welcome the returning heroes. But she was looking specifically for her students and wondering what they had learned. During their first taste of real combat, Jake Morrison was the first of her students that she spotted as the cadets disembarked from their transport shuttles. He looked older somehow, as if the experience of battle had changed him in fundamental ways. When their eyes met across the landing bay, he smiled and gave her a small salute that told her everything she needed to know about how the battle had gone. Amy Chen emerged from another shuttle, and Lisa could see immediately that something had changed in the way she carried herself. There was a new confidence in her movements, and her eyes had the sharp focus of someone who had tested her abilities against real enemies and discovered that her training was effective. Steve Martinez, Kate Williams, and Ryan Foster appeared together, and Lisa noticed that other cadets were looking at them with a mixture of respect and curiosity. These students who had been considered failures and misfits by the Academy were now being treated as heroes, who had played crucial roles in an impossible victory. But the most dramatic change was in how the other Academy instructors were looking at Lisa herself. She could see suspicion and confusion in their faces as they tried to understand how her supposedly worthless students had contributed to such an unprecedented military success. The formal debriefing sessions began the next day, and Lisa was called to attend as the instructor, responsible for several of the cadets who had participated in the battle. High Commander Vextar presided over the meetings with a team of senior officers who had been sent from Coalition Command to investigate what had happened at Meridian. Captain Rex Morrison gave the official account of the battle, and his report was filled with details that Lisa recognized from her secret teaching sessions. The cadets had used misdirection and psychological warfare to turn the Krath's numerical advantage into a weakness. They had captured enemy communication systems and used them to spread false information that confused and demoralized Krath forces. The enemy expected us to meet them in direct confrontation, Captain Morrison explained. Instead, my cadets used the asteroid field to stage coordinated deception operations that made our small force appear much larger while targeting specific weaknesses in Krath command structure. When questioned about where the cadets had learned these unconventional tactics, Captain Morrison looked directly at Lisa. Several of my officers demonstrated knowledge of strategic principles that are not part of standard coalition training. When I asked them about their preparation, they credited additional instruction they had received from Commander Harper. Lisa felt every eye in the room turn toward her, and she knew that her secret was finally revealed. "Hi, Commander." Vextar's expression was unreadable as he asked her to explain what kind of additional instruction she had been providing to the cadets. "I shared some historical examples from human military conflicts," Lisa said carefully. "The students were interested in learning about alternative approaches to tactical problems." "Alternative approaches," repeated one of the coalition officers with obvious skepticism. "Are you saying that human military history provided techniques that were effective against the Krath?" Before Lisa could answer, Jake Morrison stood up and addressed the room directly. "Sir, Commander Harper taught us that warfare is not just about strength and firepower. She showed us how to think creatively about problems and use enemy expectations against them. Without her training, we would have been destroyed at Meridian." Amy Chen joined him in standing. "The Krath are physically stronger than humans and had superior numbers, but they could not adapt when we changed the rules of engagement. Commander Harper taught us that adaptability is more valuable than raw power." One by one, all of Lisa's students stood up and spoke about what they had learned during their secret training sessions. They described how human military philosophy had given them tools to solve problems that traditional coalition doctrine could not address. Steve Martinez explained how questioning assumptions had led to innovative tactical solutions. Kate Williams demonstrated how combining different strategic approaches had confused enemy forces. Ryan Foster described how creative thinking had resulted in deception operations that turned the tide of battle. As Lisa listened to her students defend the methods she had taught them, she realized that something fundamental had changed at the academy. These young people were no longer asking permission to think differently about warfare. They were asserting their right to use whatever tools were most effective, regardless of whether those tools fit traditional expectations. High Commander Vexitar listened to everything with growing amazement. Finally, he asked the question that everyone in the room was thinking. "Are you telling me that human military thinking was responsible for this victory?" "Yes, sir," Jake Morrison answered without hesitation. "Commander Harper showed us that there are many ways to be strong in combat. Humans learned to win battles through intelligence and creativity when they could not win through force alone." The silence that followed was broken when one of the coalition officers asked Lisa directly, "Commander Harper, would you be willing to develop a formal curriculum based on these human military principles?" Lisa looked around the room at the faces of officers who had dismissed her as weak and irrelevant just months earlier. Now they were asking her to reshape military education throughout the galaxy, based on the very ideas they had once rejected. "Yes, sir," she said with quiet confidence. "I believe human strategic thinking could benefit all coalition forces." "High Commander." Vextar stood up and his expression had changed completely from the hostility Lisa remembered from their first meeting. "Commander Harper, the Galactic Military Academy hereby requests that you accept promotion to Senior Combat Instructor and take charge of developing new tactical curricula for all students." As applause filled the room, Lisa looked at her students and realized that they had done something extraordinary together. They had proven that strength came in many forms, and that the galaxy's understanding of warfare needed to evolve. The Academy had called her weak, but her human students had changed everything.